So here are the branches of that ground pine, that club moss that's called Diaphasia Astrum. It's flattened, and the leaves are sort of apressed and kind of scale-like. This is what it looks like from above. It kind of resembles pine trees, maybe an aerial view. Here's another type of club moss. It's actually Dendrolycopodium now. But notice that these branches have leaves that are sort of needle-like and sticking out, maybe a little flattened, but more nearly in all directions. In some species, actually in all directions, than compared with the flattened Diaphasia. It's a type of a club moss, and look at those strobili. This is a different type of club moss. It's in the genus Huperzia, and it's got some fairly flat, sort of sword-shaped leaves. It grows on rocks, principally, sandstone in the southeastern Ohio, like Hocking Hills, for example. And here's a close-up of Huperzia. What's distinctive about Huperzia is that it doesn't really deserve the name club moss, because instead of having its sporangia arranged in a tight spiral strobilus that looks like a club, they're actually in the axils of normal foliage leaves. So these little egg-like structures here and here and here that are sort of blebbing out from the armpits of the leaves there, those are individual sporangia. So you can't really recognize anything strikingly different than from the branches that produce sporangia from the ones that don't. And that's so-called shining club moss. Another interesting thing about shining club moss is that it also reproduces asexually. So in this picture, here in the lower part of the stem, we see some already dehisced, split open and having released the spores, sporangia, in the axils of the leaves like they are. But here, in these upper leaves, these sort of wing-like flattened, what are called gemmi. These are vegetatively reproducing asexual structures that can break off and form new plants. So this again is an instance where a plant reproduces two different ways. A lot of energy and investment into heavy propagules that are very likely to regrow, that go well in the immediate environment, which is naturally a good place for a club moss like this to grow because one already is. And then the spores, which are more adapted for dispersal to find new substrates distant from where this plant is. And asexual and sexual reproduction in a plant. This is another type of club moss called Lycopodiella. It grows in sort of open, boggy places. So let's take a look at the other type of lycophytes that we'll find, particularly the spike mosses. So this diagram shows on the left a club moss, and on the right a spike moss. The genus, by the way, is Lycopodium for the one on the left. I think I'll write this. It's kind of fun. No, it doesn't write very well. Stupid pen. Lycopodium and Selaginella. On the left, a club moss, Lycopodium. And what we'd like to notice is that it's homosporous. Here's a strobilus, and all these little sporangia are indicated to be the same. And here is a gametophyte, which produces archegonia and antheridia. It's homosporous. Here's the spike moss on the right, the Selaginella, the spike moss. It has, down here is the cross-section of the strobilus. And what it's depicting here is these sporangia here on the bottom with these big spores in them. These are called megasporangia. And they germinate to form female gametophytes. Here's a female gametophyte, and it has an archegonium on it with an egg inside. And these sporangia a little bit higher with these little tiny dots in them, these are microsporangia. They produce microspores. They develop into male gametophytes. That's what this is. And it produces sperm, which have to swim to the egg in order to effect reproduction. And this plant is heterosporous. It produces two different types of spores. Megaspores that develop into separate female gametophytes, microspores male, heterospory. In terms of the sporophyte, here's the diagram of the Lycopodium, and here's the diagram of the Selaginella. They don't look tons different. So the difference is this aspect of their spore dimorphism. So here's a picture of a fairly common-ish, relative to spike mosses, spike moss. It's called meadow spike moss, Selaginella apoda, and it's something you could mistake for maybe a moss or a club moss or maybe some little vascular plant like a stone crop, and it's called meadow spike moss. Whoa, what the heck is this? This is super, super, super exciting. I know it doesn't look like much, and boy, I messed up when I took the picture because this leaf down here is covering up a really important part of the plant. This is a quill wart. Now, most quill warts are aquatic. This is a semi-terrestrial one. The genus is Isoetes, and this is particularly Isoetes engelmannii, which is sort of stranded at the banks of streams. This was photographed in State Nature Preserve in Hocking County. And each one of these leaves, if one were to, and one wouldn't because it's such a rare plant, peel them off from the rest of the plant, one would see it's kind of spoon-shaped, and at the base of the leaf there would be sporangia. Some of the leaves would have big megasporangia that look sort of granular, and some of the leaves would have the spores inside would look sort of granular, and microsporangia that were sort of milky with tiny, tiny little spores. And this is a very unusual and exciting plant. It's called Appalachian quill wart, Isoetes engelmannii. So that finishes our foray into seedless vascular plants. And let's go out in the field sometime and discover some.